We are so excited to have Dr. Whitson here to present with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Whitson, for taking time out of your day to come and present. We've heard a lot of questions out there around navigating supporting PPS school counselors on using this fee schedule, particularly now that they're able to bill under psychotherapy. And I know, Dr. Whitson, you've been really deeply embedded in the fee schedule work and collaborating with DHCS a lot around pieces. And so we're just so happy and excited to have you here today with us.
Thank you very much. Let me pull up my presentation here uh, and there we go. So yeah, I truly appreciate being here. And this is probably the biggest thing that has happened to education. In in the profession of school counselors, the fee schedule. And yeah, I've been involved with it since the beginning. And just to say that prior to me being the executive director for the California Association of School Counselors, I was uh, in the trenches working in schools. I oversaw the Medi-Cal LEA BOP program, actually started it for our district, which is a LA County district. And and so kind of, have been through audits, was sort of a whole lot of things in regards to that, and actually in the compliance pieces or in the motivation pieces to get practitioners to participate in that program. And so I bring that to the table. But also, I just have to say that, right when the bill was passed, it was a budget trailer bill. I believe it's been 5 years. We united with an ad hoc group, which was the teachers union, CTA, the School Boards Association, and the administrators, all PPS providers. And we formed this ad hoc group, and then the county offices began to come in, and we have been meeting at least every month, if not more. And then we've been meeting with legislative bodies, or we've been writing letters to the governor in regards to some of the things that we consider are important issues within this. So I bring that to the table too, along with, understanding the school counseling profession, which is actually uniquely positioned and also a bit problematic. And you may be getting some pushback in regards to some of the things going on. And I hope I can just kind of give you the overview of why maybe we're seeing what we're seeing, and maybe some ideas on how we can remedy some of the things that are going on. Um, so in the moment, the mental health needs are just paramount. And I would say the upside of all of this is that, being in the role of in education for 35 years now, it was not really considered. And now those things are being considered quite readily. And I'm thankful for that, because while we know there's definitely been an increase in the last 10 to 15 years in mental health concerns, it has been you can't measure it, but there's been an interest in having that be a part of the educational system to address that. And that change has happened over the last 25 years for sure. Um, so the points that I'm going to consider here and talk about would be, just the evolving landscape of school counseling, how it's changed, and how the laws have changed to accommodate some of these. There's also, we have a historical issue of role confusion. There's differences in the way we consider the role of school counselors from state to state. There's a national organization, but the umbrella of it then diverges quite remarkably at the state level, which is some of the culprits behind that. But, to answer that, we decided as California to really invest our time and energy in developing some standards. And those standards are related to some new laws and legislations, and just how the school counselors can bill within those processes of the fee schedule. So we work within these three broad areas, very familiar to the school counseling profession. One of the things I do want to note on it is that the social emotional learning aspects of it was really the whole idea of social emotional learning changed. In the 90s, we weren't doing social emotional learning, or then when we did start it, it was like, oh, then the school counselors do it, not teachers. Now we have evolved into more of a broad scope and a more of an understanding that this is a part of the overall educational program with it. But that is how, school counselors define themselves. We have started to define ourselves a little bit more in the mental health or behavioral health category because we think that that is maybe the umbrella to that. And that came through a peer review process and a lot of work actually with school psychologists and school social workers to define that a little bit differently. Within the scope of practice, these are some of the things that have occurred over the last 5 years or so, 6 years now since we're in 2026. But there was new pupil personnel service training standards developed and published in 2019, and that's a peered process through the CTC. And then the governor came up with the master plan, which you're probably all familiar with, but it did call out school counselors, and his messages is to double the number of school counselors. In turn, during that time, we had been working on legislation to up the education code, define things that were ambiguous, like risk assessment, suicide assessment, mental and behavioral health in ed code, and that was passed. And out of that, in 2022, became then school counselors were able to bill starting January 1, 2023 for Medi-Cal LEA BOP, equitable to like a licensed professional counselor or other folks. So that began the process of that. When I ran that program on my district, the billing amounts were so minimal that I didn't include them in it. So that was a game changer and began to trickle out with some districts. We also had, money set aside for grants to encourage people to go into the profession. We had a residency program as an induction program. And then, of course, the Medi-Cal LEA, as I spoke about. We also, and this is all linked, and I don't know, Patrick, if you gave this to them, but okay. So you can certainly access it. I wanted you to have everything that we have available. They're all open source to see what has been evolving with school counselors. Also, it could be used as leverage to really speak to the profession. And I would say in particular, the standards for the school counseling profession is one of the best ways to describe the work that school counselors do in the state. And I'll dig into that just a little bit here. But before I do, I want to say, this is just a trajectory of how many, the workforce growth for school counseling. And so I do hear people, and I think it was well publicized back 10, 15 years ago, we had 1,000 to 1 ratio. And some people still say, oh, counselors have 1,000 to 1 ratio. Within the last 10 years. Yeah. And our ratios have then accordingly been much more manageable. We're still not at the national level of recommendation, which is 250 to 1, but going from 1,000 to 1 to 440 to 1 is certainly something to tout about and think that really is helpful. And it's incumbent on school districts and others to help school counselors to repurpose when they have reduced the ratios into ways that are going to extend services. But I know there's been a relief in regards to that. And we're pretty much in the mean for the national average for what the school counselor ratios are. So how we looked at the standards, where I'm digging in here, is that we looked at the standards and we wanted to have observable practices. It hasn't been done nationally. It was more of a kitchen sink approach to standards. So we looked at the administrative standards, the teacher standards. We looked at the languages of that, and you'll see that it really. We also looked at creating a document where administrators could be able to interpret it, because we realize that most administrators aren't trained professionally as PPS, or mostly have gone through the teacher round and then into administration. And so having language that they could adopt and use for their job descriptions, performance evaluations, all of that was what we kept in mind when those were created. And there was probably close to 500 inputs from the field, also a team of about 50 people that worked on this document. And so these are the standard areas, and I want to probably the most debatable one was the school-based mental health, and that team decided that. So I just want to make sure it wasn't me. It was a whole group of us that said, this is where we define ourselves, and we don't think it's a subcategory. We think it's a major category. Also, the one thing that we did add to these that we have had standards in the past, but this time we put in multi-tiered system of support because we believe that that was also a real umbrella concept in regards to the work that we do in preventative, early intervention, intervening, postvention, and intensive work sometimes, depending on that. So moving on, I want to also emphasize this one. So you'll see, because I think it's a good one as an example, but you'll see that we have within each of the standards, we have elements, and those elements are, I think there's 19 altogether. This one's element 2A, which is school-wide mental and behavioral health promotion. And most of the standards also look a little bit like MTSS, all and preventative care and all. And then we have the initial work that's being done, which would be a element 2B, and then element 2C would be more intense work. And so trying to capture that. But you'll see that, in that, as you see, comprehensive mental health services and addressing acute and chronic care. One of the things when I was working with the Department of Healthcare, Autumn Boyle, I told her one of the issues that are occurring in our schools is that we have students who have acute and chronic mental health issues, and then we have with our private providers and our managed care, even like Kaiser or others, 2 months or 3 months waiting period, and so capturing that effort that PPS people do on the school campus while we're waiting for clinicians, if you don't have like a community school, was part of why I believe we were also in the psychotherapy categories now, and why we have this within the standards to describe it in a way that it's more of a, we know we're not therapists, but we also know that we need to do interventions while we're waiting for the support that's needed for some of these students, especially with the rising issues of mental and behavioral health. So this year, well, no, we're 2026. Okay. Last year, I believe the published date on this is December 2025, we did a continuum of practice. So we actually were curious about what an entry-level school counselor we would want to expect from them to an advanced level school counselor. So the team and another team came together and wrote this continuum of practice, which is just now going to print. And so I wanted you to be aware of that. It's going to be open sourced too, online, and then available for purchase as a document. But that is also, I'm not speaking on it, but I wanted you to know that that exists. So I want to now talk about the application and some of the things that we are doing to apply the standards to the fee schedule so that school counselors understand. Some of the issues is just the way the language coming out of the Department of Healthcare is more of a clinical medical language, and so the difficulty is that doesn't translate well, and I use words like supervision doesn't translate well. We have codes on supervision, others have, there's codes and like education codes, there's codes in the health codes on supervision. Those things are really difficult. Treatment, we've been trying to remedy with the Department of Healthcare, so it does fit the school population vernacular, and so those are the things that we've been doing on and we're still not quite where I'd like it to be, but there has been improvement on it. So this is, what we did is we took and I worked with Autumn Boyle on this. We took, a term that is pretty easy to understand, trauma counseling. And then we built out of this a scenario, what has happened to this student, as you'll see on the left-hand side. And then you'll see that the school counselor, what they do. So this is their language: conduct a trauma screening, connect with the family, train the classroom teacher sometimes, on how to deal with the situation, do individual counseling. And then we also put together, standard 2, standard 5, and standard 2 for school-based mental health, and element 2C. So not to describe it because you can read it, but we listed that those 3 areas really are the standards. So it does apply to your work. And then on the far right, you'll see that there is the codes that would fit within that. So that just tries to normalize it. What we've been doing is doing standard training because that's also new for them. And so training them on these standards and letting them understand about the changes in the ed code that authorizes them to do that. We do courses with UC Santa Barbara to offer DEFL courses for those that feel like they may have got their credential ways, a few decades ago, and they really want to bone up on some things. So, example, which would be college stress and burnout. We know that counselors deal with that. So I see my internet connection is unstable. I hope I'm not frozen. Am I okay? Okay. Okay, good. Because it's been kind of wonky this morning. So, offering stress management workshops, going into the classroom, some of those kinds of things that we do. Adjust the student's academic load for individual support, normalize help seeking, and, work to connect with students with therapists. So you'll see the standards that fit, standard 2, standard 5, and again, standard 2, and then where that might fit within the billing process. And then we have a number of these. I've just picked and choose some different ones, and so here's a gender identity situation. What does the counselor do? Where the standards are, and again, where might there be billing connections here that they could use. So that's kind of the way we've done that. The other piece that I do in going out there, and I do this mostly for administrators, is the idea is that we have complex change here, and God knows we all know this, so this is one of the biggest things I've ever worked on, is the fee schedule, and I really appreciate that you all are working on it day in and day out. But for administrators, it's to help them kind of settle and to think about, are they making sure that there's a vision for this and that they have the skills for the school, whoever is working on the fee scale, the skills necessary. Are they motivated, to do the work, which we're finding that there's hesitancy there. Is there resources? And then is there an action plan in regards to that? And so that to me is where, when I taught at the university, I always use this because I thought it was just a good 1991 when it came out, but a good model to look at when you're looking at what's going on and where we think that there might be some problems, and I do think that if, just from my own vantage point, that what's missing somewhat is the skills and the motivation and the resources, so, I hear from counselors all the time in these areas, like the why would be the motivation. Should I do this? Why should I participate? Resources, what am I going to get for this, and how am I going to do the paperwork? Why are they asking me? They see it as more because change is always about, we may say we were about change, but it's about our own change. When someone asks us to change, it's usually some resistance that comes with that. And so those kinds of things like that. So that I'm dealing with on a regular basis. I would say at least once a day, if not twice a day, I hear from someone that is wanting me to talk to them about their concerns. So these are some suggestions that I have in regards to complex change, which would be the set attentions and long range plans so they know where they're going with it. I just think it's just practical. They probably need to know that we are also building this plane as it's flying, and it's been difficult, for a lot of us in regards to it, because it's just things change and we learn as we go. The ongoing professional development on not just fee schedule, but other things will help solidify, I believe, their role and function, because they are lacking that. And there's a big difference, by the way, in county cases school counselors see their role in the state of California. Some have had direct access to us, especially our Southern California districts and our major area districts like the Bay Area. But I find a lot of them are not seeing their role completely within all the areas. They might define themselves more as a college and career counselor, for example. So providing professional development about the scope of practice and their potential and where the limits are for the scope of practice, and then the motivation for value added for the school counselors. I know a lot of districts are saying, we're going to keep your job. And I get that too, because I was an administrator. And yes, and would be very helpful. Professional development, a lot of times school counselors don't get the same level of professional development as others on school campuses, the teachers and administrators. So looking at that as some easy ways to bring in more services for them. Billing templates and crosswalk language is essential. There's concerns about liability. There's concerns about how some of the language is. And so crosswalking those language, some of the third-party billers are doing that, but to help with it. So it makes it a little bit more comfortable for them. And then there's slow reach, which is the continuous reinforcement, and define the next steps for them. So that is my 10-minute, 15-minute presentation, Patrick, and I'm open.